You get that filthy line out of my pond right now." Karen's voice, a shrill, manic siren, sliced through the tranquil hum of the June morning. It wasn't just loud, it was laced with a venom that made the sparrows scattering from the oak tree seem like a natural response. Her face, usually a mask of carefully applied composure, was a raw, contorted snarl, eyes blazing, finger jabbing like a weapon. My son Ethan barely flinched. He was 10, all elbows and knees, his faded baseball cap pulled low, his focus unwavering on the slight tension in his fishing rod. He sat on the bank, a silhouette against the rising sun, the pond's surface glinting like scattered diamonds. Karen, however, saw only an invasion, another deliberate slight from the new money family who'd bought the old Miller place next door. She'd made it clear from day one that she considered our shared property line, delineated by a flimsy, forgotten fence, a sacred, inviolable border, and the pond, which technically touched both properties, exclusively hers. This wasn't just about a fishing line, it was about dominion. About asserting a perceived social hierarchy she felt slipping, a quiet, simmering resentment that had finally boiled over. "It's our pond, too, Karen," I said, stepping out onto the deck, my voice calm, but with an edge I couldn't quite mask. I'd seen this coming. For weeks, she'd been circling, making vague accusations, muttering about missing valuables, a lost heirloom, a misplaced ring, a mysterious disappearance of cash. The whispers had traveled faster than gossip in a small town. But this morning, with Ethan's line disturbing her precious water, it had morphed from a general grievance into a targeted attack. "Your boy is trespassing, and I wouldn't put it past him, after what's gone missing." She spat the words, her gaze sweeping from Ethan to me, a calculated judgment in her eyes. It was the implied accusation, the insinuation of theft, that made my blood run cold. She saw a boy, slightly tanned from endless hours outdoors, dressed in worn jeans, and instantly projected suspicion. The casual dismissal, the immediate leap to criminal intent, was a familiar sting. We were new here, and in Karen's world, new often meant lesser, especially if you didn't fit her narrow definition of acceptable wealth and lineage. Ethan, bless his quiet heart, didn't respond to her bait. He just tugged his line, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then, the tip of his rod dipped sharply. "Got something," he murmured, his voice tight with effort. He reeled, slowly, steadily, the monofilament cutting a faint V through the water. Karen scoffed, a disgusted sound, probably just junk, or something he stole and dumped in my pond to hide. The water churned, a dark shape breaking the surface. It wasn't a fish. As Ethan meticulously reeled it closer, a glint of gold, then the unmistakable sparkle of diamonds caught the sunlight. He drew it to the bank, the object dripping, catching the light like a constellation of tiny stars. It was a necklace, intricate and heavy, undeniably expensive. Karen's eyes, still narrowed with malice, suddenly widened to saucers. Her jaw went slack. The tirade died on her lips. Ethan, oblivious to the seismic shift he'd just caused, carefully unhooked the chain from his lure. He held it up, dripping, the diamonds catching fire. "Is this yours, Karen?" he asked, his voice soft, genuinely curious. The necklace dangled, a glittering, undeniable truth. It was a heavy gold chain, intricately woven, with a large, antique pendant studded with what looked like genuine, substantial diamonds. The same necklace Karen had described in hushed, aggrieved tones to Mrs. Henderson at the grocery store, to Mr. Davies by the mailbox, and to anyone else who would listen. Her $10,000 family heirloom mysteriously vanished from her dresser a week ago. Her face, a moment ago, crimson with fury, drained to an ashen white. The immediate, raw accusation she'd hurled at my son had just been contradicted by the universe, served up on a fishing line. Karen stared at the necklace, then at Ethan, then back at the necklace as if it were a venomous snake poised to strike. Her initial shock gave way to a flicker of something unreadable, fear, disbelief, before settling into a familiar, rigid denial. "That's impossible," she stammered, her voice a reedy whisper, a stark contrast to her earlier bellow. "It was stolen. From my bedroom, no one could have possibly—" Her words trailed off, a desperate scramble for a new narrative. Ethan, still holding the glittering chain, looked at her with an innocent, unblinking gaze. "It was just on my hook," he said, his small hands carefully extending it towards her. The gesture was simple, truthful, and utterly disarming. Karen took a hesitant step back, as if the necklace itself were contaminated. "Don't touch me with that. How could it be there?" Her eyes darted around, searching for a culprit, a reason, anything but the obvious truth. Her gaze snagged on our house, then swept over the pond, trying to rewrite the scene in her mind. "He must have thrown it in there, to hide it, or you did." She whirled on me, her finger back in its jabbing stance, her voice regaining some of its shrill volume. "You put your boy up to this. You're trying to cover something up. Karen, please, I said, stepping between her and Ethan. He just pulled it out of the water. You saw it. There's no trickery here. My voice was calm, but inside, a cold anger was building. She wasn't just accusing him, she was trying to discredit undeniable proof, right before her eyes. Just then, Mrs. Henderson, lured by Karen's initial shouts, emerged from her own meticulously manicured backyard, a watering can in hand. Her eyes, usually crinkled with good humor, widened as she took in the scene. Karen, pale and disheveled, shouting, Ethan, quiet, and holding a dazzling piece of jewelry. And me, standing as a shield. Karen, is everything all right? Mrs. Henderson asked, her voice laced with concern, but also a hint of curiosity. News of Karen's missing necklace had spread like wildfire, and everyone knew it was supposedly a priceless family heirloom. Garin seized on Mrs. Henderson's presence. No, it's not all right. My necklace, the one I told you about. This boy, he found it. In the pond, but he must have thrown it there himself after stealing it. They're trying to make me look like a fool. Her voice grew louder with each desperate lie, trying to rally an ally, to twist the narrative to her advantage. Mrs. Henderson's gaze flickered to the necklace, then back to Karen, a faint frown creasing her brow. But Karen, if he found it, how could he have stolen it? The simple logic seemed to pierce through Karen's frantic accusations, if only for a moment. Karen faltered, then doubled down. He's a child. They're cunning, they'll do anything. This isn't how it was supposed to happen. It was taken. She clutched her head, her hand trembling. It was clear she wasn't just in denial about Ethan finding the necklace. She was in denial about the entire narrative she had built around its disappearance. There was something more than just simple loss or theft at play here. The necklace wasn't just valuable. It was a prop in a drama only Karen understood. The morning's bizarre discovery had thrown Karen into a tailspin. After Mrs. Henderson's presence diffused the immediate shouting match, Karen, for all her bluster, still cared deeply about appearances. She retreated, muttering, back to her house. Ethan, still holding the necklace, handed it to me. It was heavier than I expected, cool against my palm, the diamonds catching the morning light with an almost blinding intensity. A small, almost imperceptible, scratch marred one of the gold links, and a faint earthy smell clung to it. Later that afternoon, after Ethan was engrossed in his video game, I called my sister, Sarah. She'd known Karen for years. Before Karen married into what she considered the right family and moved into this exclusive cul-de-sac. Sarah, Karen's $10,000 necklace. Ethan just pulled it out of the pond. A beat of silence on the other end. No way, Sarah, finally said, disbelief coloring her tone. That thing, the one her great-grandmother supposedly wore to the coronation. She's been wailing about it for a week. Said it vanished right off her dressing table. Implied it was a professional job, even while it took a fishing line to retrieve it. I sighed, recounting the morning's surreal events. She completely lost it. Accused Ethan of throwing it in to hide it after stealing it. That's classic Karen, Sarah said, a cynical laugh escaping her. Always a drama. Look, what's she been like lately? I heard she's been stressed. I paused, considering Karen had been more erratic than usual. Short-tempered, quick to anger, and strangely possessive of her property. Her complaints about the necklace had been particularly exaggerated, almost theatrical. She's been very high-strung, more than usual, and obsessed with the necklace. She acted like it was the only thing standing between her and utter destitution. Sarah mused. You know her husband, Richard, is in some deep financial trouble, right? Their real estate venture went belly up last month. Huge losses. I heard they're hemorrhaging money. She's probably desperate. That necklace might be their last liquid asset, or she might have been hoping for an insurance payout. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Insurance fraud. The thought had flickered through my mind, but I'd dismissed it as too extreme. But if Karen was truly desperate, if the necklace was indeed worth that much, it explained her manic accusations, her desperate need for the stolen narrative. A simple loss wouldn't yield an insurance claim. Theft, especially a professional job, certainly would. The scratch on the link, the earthy smell, it suggested a hasty disposal, not a careful placement by a child. Later, I decided to take the necklace to a reputable jeweler in the next town, just to be sure of its authenticity and value. I told Ethan I needed to get it appraised for Karen, to help her out. He nodded, completely innocent of the adult machinations at play. The jeweler, a kind older woman with spectacles perched on her nose, examined it under a loupe. It's genuine, she confirmed, her voice low. Diamonds are high quality. Setting is antique gold. Easily, 10,000, perhaps more, depending on the market on a given day. A beautiful piece, but it has been through something. She pointed to a faint, dark smudge near the clasp. Almost looks like a residue from something burnt. or a harsh chemical. And this scratch, she indicated the one I'd noticed. It's not from wear. Looks like a fresh gouge, maybe from a sharp metal edge. My mind immediately went to the faint scent I'd detected. Burnt, chemical residue. A fresh gouge. This wasn't consistent with a theft from a dressing table. This was consistent with something far more violent, far more intentional, and far less innocent. The jeweler's observations solidified my suspicions. This wasn't just a lost item. It was a calculated scheme gone awry. The burnt residue and fresh gouge on the necklace haunted me. Karen's narrative of a professional theft from her pristine dressing table seemed increasingly flimsy, especially after Ethan had pulled it from the pond. But if she hadn't lost it, and it hadn't been stolen in the way she claimed, then what had really happened? I decided to do some discreet digging. I started with Mrs. Henderson, ostensibly to return a borrowed gardening tool. As we chatted over her prize-winning petunias, I casually brought up Karen. She seemed really upset this morning about the necklace. I began. Mrs. Henderson sighed, shaking her head. Oh, bless her heart. She's been beside herself, said I. She looked everywhere, even hired that private investigator last week. The one from the next town over. You know, Mr. Davies recommended him. A private investigator. That was new information. Really? A private investigator for a necklace? I feigned surprise. Oh yes, she was convinced it was an inside job. Mrs. Henderson confided, leaning in said only someone who knew the layout of the house could have done it. She was even questioning her house cleaner for a while. Poor woman. And she told me she had pictures of the necklace for the insurance company. They needed very specific details, she said. My pulse quickened. Pictures for insurance. This was escalating beyond a simple lie. It pointed to a premeditated attempt to claim insurance, perhaps after manufacturing a theft. Did she say where she last saw it? Oh, always on her dressing table, she swore. Said she put it there every night after wearing it. Mrs. Henderson looked thoughtful, though now that I think of it, she was quite distraught. Last Tuesday she came over, crying, saying she and Richard had a terrible fight. Something about his business, and money. And how he was ruining everything. She had a nasty bruise on her arm, too. Said she'd fallen but she was clutching her chest, like she was protecting something. Tuesday, the day before the necklace, was discovered missing. A fight with Richard, financial troubles, a bruise, and clutching her chest. The pieces were starting to click into place, forming a disturbing picture. The burnt residue and fresh gouge could be from a struggle, a desperate act. I returned home, my mind racing. I needed to find a way to verify the pictures for insurance claim. If she had filed a police report, that would be public record, but she hadn't mentioned it. More likely, she'd gone directly to her insurance company with a pre-planned narrative. That evening, I did some online research. I found a local news article from a few months back about Richard Thorne, Karen's husband. His real estate development, a large, ambitious project, had indeed gone bankrupt. The article detailed significant investor losses and mentioned that Thorne's personal assets being at risk. It also mentioned a substantial loan Richard had taken out, one that specifically used their house as collateral. The house, the very asset Karen was so fiercely defending, even down to her half of the pond. But next morning, while Ethan was at a friend's house, I saw Richard's car in Karen's driveway. This was rare. He was usually at his office or out of town. I took a chance. I walked over, armed with the retrieved necklace, wrapped carefully in a velvet cloth. I rang the doorbell. Karen opened it, her eyes red-rimmed, her face blotchy. She'd been crying. What do you want? She snapped, her voice hoarse. I just wanted to return this, I said, holding out the necklace. Ethan found it in the pond yesterday. The jeweler confirmed it's yours. A valuable piece. Richard appeared behind her, his face pale and drawn, his shoulders slumped. He took one look at the necklace in my hand, then at Karen's distraught face, and a look of profound weariness crossed his features. Karen, what is this? His voice was devoid of anger, just exhaustion. Karen's eyes darted between the necklace and her husband. The mask was crumbling. The sheer weight of her lies, coupled with the undeniable evidence in my hand, was finally breaking through. The air in Karen's elegant living room was thick with unspoken tension. Richard sat heavily on the pristine white sofa, staring at the necklace I'd placed on the polished coffee table. Karen stood by the window, her back to us, her shoulders rigid. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant chirping of birds and the anxious thumping of my own heart. Finally, Richard spoke, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. Karen, is this what I think it is? Karen spun around, her face a mixture of defiance and desperation. It's nothing, Richard, it's just that woman trying to cause trouble. She gestured vaguely in my direction, but her eyes kept returning to the glittering necklace. Cause trouble, I said, my voice steady, though my hands were clenched. Karen, my 10-year-old son pulled this out of the pond after you accused him of being a thief and implied he was involved in some professional job. I had it appraised. It's certainly worth the $10,000 you claimed, perhaps more. Richard's head snapped up. $10,000. What are you talking about, Karen? She flinched, then snapped. It's my necklace. Richard, my great-grandmother's. It went missing, that's all, missing. Richard rose slowly, his weary eyes fixed on her. Or did you throw it in the pond yourself, trying to save what little we have left? His voice was devoid of anger, just a deep, crushing sorrow. Karen's defiance crumbled. Her carefully constructed facade shattered, revealing the raw, desperate woman beneath. Her voice broke. How could you say that? But there was no real conviction in her tone. Because, I interjected. Stepping forward, I spoke to Mrs. Henderson. She told me about your fight with Richard last Tuesday, about your bruise, and about how you were clutching your chest. I paused, letting the implication hang in the air. The jeweler also found a strange residue on the necklace, like a harsh chemical or something burnt, and a fresh gouge mark, like it was forced off. Karen's face went white. She finally sank into an armchair, covering her face with trembling hands. Richard watched her, his own pain evident. She was trying to sell it, Richard said, his voice barely audible. His gaze fixed on the floor. We're drowning. My business, it's gone. I tried everything. The house, our savings, everything's tied up. She was desperate. She wanted to sell the necklace discreetly, pay off some of the smaller debts, just to get us some breathing room, but she found out it's harder than she thought. Most places wanted proof of ownership or asked too many questions. And then, she told me she lost it, that it was stolen. He finally looked at me, a look of profound shame in his eyes. She told me she planned to claim it on insurance, as a theft, to get the money that way. Karen let out a strangled SOB, pulling her hands away to reveal a face streaked with tears. I didn't know what else to do. We're ruined, Richard. We're losing everything. This house, our life. I was just trying to save something. Her voice was raw, choked, with a desperation that was almost pitiable. I wore it out that morning. I was so upset after our fight. I was so angry, so scared. I went out by the pond. I don't know. I took it off. I don't know why. I just wanted it gone. I thought it was cursed, bringing us bad luck. I threw it. I just wanted it out of my sight. She buried her face in her hands again. And then, when I realized what I'd done, I panicked. I couldn't tell Richard. He'd be so disappointed. And then, the insurance. It was the only way I could think of. To make it seem like a theft. I knew they wouldn't believe a simple loss. The truth, messy and tragic, hung in the air. Karen hadn't just accidentally lost it. She'd thrown it in a fit of despair and anger, then concocted an elaborate lie for an insurance payout, fueled by financial ruin and a desperate need to maintain her image. Her fear and desperation had made her lash out, projecting her own desperation and guilt onto an innocent child. The burnt residue was likely from something she'd touched in her panicked state, perhaps something from a makeshift fire pit near the pond, or even a chemical from the garage. The gouge, from the sheer force of her frantic removal. The full weight of Karen's admission hung heavy in the air, a thick, suffocating silence. Richard sat motionless, his face etched with a profound weariness. Karen continued to sob, her body shaking with the force of her confession. My initial anger had subsided, replaced by a complex mix of pity and a lingering sense of indignation on Ethan's behalf. Karen, I said, my voice softer now, but firm, you accused my son. You spread rumors. You subjected him to baseless suspicion and ridicule. She looked up, her eyes puffy and red. I'm so sorry. I wasn't thinking. I was just so terrified. I saw him there, and it seemed like a way out. To blame someone, anyone, to make it look like a real theft. I never meant to hurt him. Her apology felt hollow, drenched in self-pity rather than genuine remorse for her actions towards Ethan. Your desperation doesn't excuse slandering an innocent child, I stated, my voice regaining its edge. And it certainly doesn't excuse insurance fraud. Richard finally stirred. He looked at Karen, his gaze tired but unwavering. You were going to do this, Karen. File a false claim. What about the PI you hired? Was he part of this? No, Karen wailed. He was just part of the show, to make it look real. I was going to tell him I didn't need his services after I filed the claim. This isn't just about the necklace anymore, Karen, Richard said, his voice flat. This is about our integrity. My reputation. What little is left of it. And yours. What do we do now? I looked at them both. Richard, clearly exhausted and defeated, seemed genuinely unaware of the full extent of Karen's desperate plan. Karen, on the other hand, was purely focused on escaping consequences. "Here's what you do," I said, picking up the necklace. "First, you need to return this to where it belongs, properly. Then, you need to issue a public apology to Ethan and to the entire neighborhood for the false accusations and the drama you created. And you need to be transparent about what happened, at least in general terms, without going into all the sordid details of your financial situation." I held her gaze. "And finally, you need to drop any pretense of an insurance claim. If you pursue that, I will be forced to present this evidence." Karen flinched at the word evidence. The threat of legal repercussions, even if implied, seemed to finally penetrate her self-absorption. A public apology," she stammered, her voice thin. "But, what will people think? They'll think you're a human being who made a terrible mistake," I retorted, "which is better than thinking you're a manipulative liar. This isn't a game, Karen. My son was hurt by your accusations. His innocence needs to be unequivocally clear." Richard stepped in. "She's right, Karen. We have to clear the boy's name. And ours. We'll say it was a misunderstanding, that the necklace was found, and the confusion was due to our own stress. We don't need to air all our dirty laundry, but we need to acknowledge the truth of its discovery." He looked at me. "We'll drop any insurance claim." Immediately, over the next few days, the small cul-de-sac buzzed with whispers. Karen, pale and subdued, went door to door, necklace visibly clutched in her hand, offering a stilted, awkward apology to her neighbors. She explained, vaguely, that in her distraught state over its loss, she had made unfounded accusations and was deeply sorry. She specifically apologized to Ethan, though her eyes still avoided his. The community, initially skeptical, slowly began to shift its view. The narrative of poor Karen, whose necklace was stolen, morphed into stressed Karen, who made a mistake. The truth of Ethan's innocence was cemented, not just by his finding the necklace, but by Karen's public, albeit reluctant, retraction. His quiet strength throughout the ordeal earned him a new respect among the adults, a silent acknowledgement of his moral fortitude. Life on the cul-de-sac slowly, almost imperceptibly, settled back into a semblance of normalcy. Karen's carefully cultivated image, however, had taken a significant hit. The grand narratives she'd woven about her family's prestige, her own impeccable life, her victimhood, were now seen through a lens of skepticism. Her desperate act, fueled by financial ruin, had exposed a raw vulnerability and a calculating edge that few had seen before. She became quieter, less prone to dramatic pronouncements, and her interactions with neighbors, while civil, lacked their former performative flourish. The whispered theories about Richard's business troubles became more pronounced, though no one ever openly confronted them. Ethan, remarkably, seemed unfazed by the whole ordeal. He continued to fish in the pond, now with a quiet, unbothered confidence. The pond, once a symbol of territorial dispute, had become a quiet testament to his innocence. He hadn't sought vindication, only truth, and in its revelation, he had found a quiet dignity that transcended Karen's petty grievances. The incident, rather than scarring him, seemed to have deepened his already calm demeanor, cementing his trust in his own quiet integrity. For me, the experience was a stark reminder of how easily prejudice and assumptions could take root. Karen hadn't seen a child. She'd seen an opportunity, a convenient scapegoat for her own desperation. Her bias, rooted in class and perceived social standing, had clouded her judgment to the point of slandering an innocent boy. The speed with which her accusations had been absorbed by some neighbors, eager to believe the worst about the newcomers, was a sobering thought. It highlighted the fragile nature of reputation and the pervasive human tendency to accept a convenient narrative, even in the face of contradictory evidence. The necklace, the source of so much turmoil, was now back in Karen's possession. Whether she still intended to sell it discreetly, or if she found another way to navigate their financial woes, remained an unspoken question. Richard and Karen continued to live next door, their house still impeccably maintained, but the sheen of their perfect life had dulled. They were no longer the untouchable, prosperous couple. They were simply two people struggling, one of whom had stumbled badly under pressure. The resolution wasn't a triumphant, Hollywood-esque victory. It was quieter, more realistic. Justice had been served in the clearing of Ethan's name and the exposure of Karen's deceit, but it came with the uncomfortable truth of human desperation and the casual cruelty of unfounded accusation. The cul-de-sac, once a place of polite, surface-level interactions, now harbored a deeper, unspoken understanding of its residents. It was a reminder that behind every manicured lawn and hushed rumor lay complex, often painful, human stories, and sometimes, the most profound truths were fished out of the most unexpected places by the most innocent of hands.